Good evening, everyone. It's Sandy Kamen-Wisniewski with Animal Education and Rescue. I'm so glad to be here with you this evening. We're going to give it a minute or so for people to jump on board, and we are doing a live, and this is a very special live, a one-time broadcast on how to start your own rescue organization, how to start your own animal rescue organization, and the inside scoop on how I did it, and the pros and cons and all of the pitfalls and happy times and everything else. So we're going to give it a minute or so and let people jump on board and see who wants to see this. You know, a lot of people are curious as to how to start an organization like this, and a lot of people have come up to me and said, oh, I've always wanted to do this. I've always wanted to run my own animal rescue organization. Hold on, I'm going to put on one. There we go. Another light so you can see. So a lot of people say that. I've had people say to me, oh, I'm so jealous of you. I've always wanted to do this. It's been my life's dream to start an animal rescue organization. And I just smile and say, you have no idea. You have no idea. In your fantasy, it sure sounds romantic, but it is not. It's a lot of hard work. So if somebody could just say hi to me and let me know that you can hear me and I could see you, that would be great. See your words. And you could see a kitty cat in the background. That up there is Emma. Emma doesn't normally go up that high. I'm surprised she's up there. She's actually quite clumsy kitty. So hopefully she won't go stumbling down. Hi, Joy. Okay, so Joy said hi. And let's see. We're going to give it a minute more. And Joy, can you be my timekeeper and let me know when it's 7:30? That would be great. And then when it's 7:45, we're going to run this program for an hour. And if it lasts longer than an hour, I'm happy to do it. I've never done a program like this before. I don't know how many people are going to want to know this information. And so we'll see how it goes and take it from there. So I see Caroline says hello. Hi, Caroline. Good to have you join me. So let's see how many people get on board. I think I might be a minute early. So I did write some notes so I didn't forget certain things. And hopefully we'll get some new people on that have really kind of thought about starting an animal rescue organization. There's periodically there's discussion on Facebook about people that start animal rescue organizations and don't know what they're getting themselves into and just kind of jump in and make a lot of mistakes, and actually animals end up having problems because of the mistakes that people make. And so thus was my motivation in actually running this, is hoping to get some of these people on board here that are thinking about starting an organization, and that way if they do end up doing it, they at least have a better idea of what they're getting themselves involved in before they actually do it. Because once you kind of get your feet in and you start doing this, it makes it difficult to back out once you get started. So hi Corey, good day. Hi Ashley. Okay, let's see. All right. So we've got a few people on. Not as many as I was hoping for. I was hoping to get a decent crowd simply because I really want to spread this message. And the reason I want to spread this message is exactly what I told you a minute ago, is that a lot of people start an animal rescue organization really thinking it's going to be easier than it is, and not having any idea how much is involved in doing it. And some of the things that you didn't even think about, and certainly when I started it was things that I didn't think about. I didn't have any idea. There was nothing written about it back when I started. And so, you know, it certainly made a lot of problems for me in my life, and I want to help people avoid those problems in their life. I'm battling a little bit of a cold, so you'll have to bear with me if I sneeze or I cough or blow my nose, but you know, I'm still trying to battle this thing, and you know, it's the way it goes. You know, no rest for the weary, as they say. You know, the job continues. We fight on, as we say. So I'm going to get started. Actually, the people that I see that are on right now, at least some of them, already know who I am. So you're going to have to bear with me, and you're going to hear some things that maybe you already know. So, but I promise you'll learn lots of new things here tonight. First of all, welcome. Thank you for coming tonight. And my name is Sandy Kamen-Wisniewski, and I am the founder and director of Animal Education and Rescue. And I just want to let you know Animal Education and Rescue is a full-service humane society for animals, which means that our mission is to bring people and animals together through education, therapy, and rescue. So we do educational programs like you're seeing tonight. We also do therapy where we go into nursing homes and sometimes hospice and other opportunities to provide therapy with animals for people that need it. And of course, we also do rescue, where we rescue animals and we do humane investigations and so forth. And so we are a full-service humane society. We're actually not a rescue group. A rescue group is one that concentrates all its efforts on rescuing animals, and our mission is very different from that. And so we always appreciate any donations anybody can make towards these educational programs. It does take time to put them on, and it is helping the community, helping the world actually with social media to actually better the lives of animals through our educational programs. So if anybody is able to make a donation in honor of this educational program, that would be fabulous. You can go to our website, and it's in the description below on the video, but I'll mention it a couple times. It's aear.org, aear.org. Okay, so I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I live in the Lake County area in Illinois, and I've lived here my entire life. I moved 25 minutes from the original home that I grew up in and lived in my whole life. So I have been deep-rooted in this community my whole life. I've always been an animal lover, and from the time I was a very small child, and there is one of those stupid stink bugs in here that is flipping around on the light. Gross. Now it's flying towards me. Okay, you guys are just gonna have to hang tight while I get this stupid thing, okay? Hang on, don't go anywhere. Gotta get this stink bug out of here. Hold on. Oh, come on. Where'd it go? Oh, nasty thing. Come on. I got it. Okay. All right, you guys. And you know what I did? Like, pulled the light. Can you see that? Oh, you can't see that really well, can you? I pulled the light out of the fixture, too, while I was at it. So, and I know, like Corey, you probably don't have stink bugs in Australia. They're nasty. They're nasty. We have them. They started coming around our area a couple years ago, and we have tons of them in our houses. They look like little beetles, I guess. They don't bite or anything, but they are nasty. And if you smush them, they smell kind of a little like skunk. So, oh, you do have stink bugs? Oh, well, we have them everywhere. So it's bad. So I just pulled the light out of the fixture by accident. So, oh well. Anyway, okay. So where was I? So a little bit about myself. So I have 3 children. I live in the Libertyville area, and I've always been a small business owner. Hi, Kathy. And I started my first business when I was 18 years old. I started a company called the Pet Sitters of America. It was a service business that provided pet sitting for people when they go out of town. My husband actually runs that company today. That company was started in 1987. I'm aging myself. And believe it or not, that company is really the biggest supporter of animal education and rescue. So started that, run a lot of other businesses throughout my life, also ran some nonprofit organizations. So it was really not out of the realm of my ability to be able to start a nonprofit animal rescue humane society. And so I want to mention that to you because I'm going to also talk to you a lot about some of the pitfalls that I ran into and some of the things I had no idea what I was getting myself involved in. So just to share some history of animal education and rescue, and I'm going to ask, by the way, periodically for questions. So I want, because I have to see visually your questions, it's hard to talk and also like concentrate on what I'm saying and read your questions. So periodically I'm going to ask you, do you have any questions? And then I'm just going to wait a second or so, a couple seconds, and see if anybody has any questions. That way, hopefully we can keep it flowing and it's not just one giant dialogue by me. So first of all, some history of animal education and rescue. I started the organization in 2003. So 2003. So the company's been in business 15 years. And I started the company in memory of my dog, Mota, who was a rescue dog from Orphans of the Storm in Riverwoods, Illinois, and he died of old age. And in my grief, I wanted to do something to honor his memory. And I had always thought about starting a nonprofit humane society. And at that time, I was even thinking I wanted to open actually a shelter at that, way early on in like the 1990s when I originally thought of the idea. I wanted to do something that would bring people and animals together. And then when Mota died, my kids were teenagers at the time. They were no longer babies and they were somewhat self-sufficient. And so I thought it was a good time to start animal education and rescue. And so in memory of Mota, who was 13 years old and we had to put him to sleep because he had heart failure, I started animal education and rescue. So that was in September of 2003. And really, I've got a cat pooping right here. Okay, Tiny, can you cover the poop? See, it never ends. I'm telling you, it never ends. Okay, don't spell it. Cover it. You're covering the ground. There's nothing on the ground. She's going like this to the ground. Oh, maybe she just peed. Okay, that's better. Pooping would have made the room smell. Okay. Hi, Sandy. I am feeling okay. Thank you for asking how I'm feeling. Okay, so back in 2003 when I started the organization, I started the organization with about $100 of my own money. Now, I want to share periodically throughout this live some realistic facts about starting a nonprofit organization. The big nonprofit organizations, like for instance, there's Paws of Chicago, there's Orphans of the Storm in Riverwoods, which is a bigger size shelter in our area, and other, those are the two I can think off the top of my head. But typically, when you see these nonprofit organizations that actually end up being very large and having a lot of staff, having a shelter, having a lot of volunteers, having a lot of money, they typically are started by individuals that already have a lot of money. People that not only have a lot of money, but also, this is not all the time, okay? So don't think it's all the time, because I'll get into that. But a lot of times it is, because of the fact that when you run a nonprofit organization, while you need to make money to keep the organization going, the people that found the organization or started, like myself or like whoever starts whatever organization, they have to have another source of income, because they're not going to be making any money in order to keep doing what they're doing and in order to grow the organization. And then if somebody is wealthy to begin with, and let's say their spouse or their family, maybe it's inherited money or whatever, that takes care of their personal bills and their personal, everything that they do for their personal life, then it gives them the ability, the time, and the devotion to be able to dedicate to running a nonprofit organization. Plus, people typically hang out with people like themselves. So people that have a lot of money typically know other people that have a lot of money. So they have a bigger pool of people to actually get donations from. So if I'm wealthy and I'm living, let's say, in an area where the houses are $1 million houses, and I know my neighbors, then I can ask my neighbors who have more money for donations. Or if, let's say, I am a person that's working, top-notch or a corporation, and I'm making over 6 figures, and I hang out with all the other people that are making 6 figures or more. Whoops, I just spilled water all over. That make that kind of money, then obviously I can ask for more money than if I was a person that, let's say, is, your average person that is, making enough money to be able to survive on, but not much more. Typically, you live in a nice neighborhood or a decent neighborhood, but, people aren't wealthy. They're just going, maybe taking a vacation a year, they're middle class. They're not going to have the kind of dollar amount that wealthy people have. So, and they're not going to typically be hanging out with people that are. So you get my drift, okay? So in my case, I was a small business owner, as I told you, and I did not come from a lot of money. I had never gotten an inheritance. And Chuck and I, my husband Chuck and I, were struggling small business owners. And so when I started Animal Education and Rescue, I started it with about $100. And the $100 went to filing the necessary paperwork to actually become an Illinois nonprofit organization, which I thought, oh, that's all I need to do is become an Illinois nonprofit organization. Well, that's not true. You have to actually become a federally recognized nonprofit organization in order to really be able to grow your organization, because then you can accept, people will make donations to you and it's tax deductible to them. It also recognizes you as a full-fledged nonprofit organization, a 501c3 organization. So the initial $100 I spent on becoming an Illinois nonprofit at least got me to be able to, actually open the organization. And then over a period of a year and a half, I had a volunteer that devoted their time to doing all the necessary paperwork and so forth to actually become a federally recognized 501c3 nonprofit organization. And then that opened up a ton of opportunities for us to be able to accept donations, grants. We could apply for grants. We could get donations from corporations. Individuals were more likely to give us donations. But, it's a lot of paperwork, and the government really, watches you very closely. And, there's a lot of rules you have to follow and so forth. So I want to make sure everybody understands that part. And so can you start an organization, a nonprofit organization like an animal rescue organization, and do it for chump change? Yes. Without any family help or friends help or anything like that, with very little money, yes. But it is really, it's not that easy, and you have to have the right setup in order for that to happen. In our case, the way we were able to make it happen is at that time, back in 2003, I ran Animal Education and Rescue. I started that, and I also ran the Pet Sitters of America. So I ran 2 companies, and so simultaneously I was running both companies. And so Pet Sitters of America actually paid my salary. Of course, I owned that company, so I was able to work that company and manage Animal Education at once. So I juggled both businesses, and it was really, really, really hard. The one thing I have to say though, from a financial standpoint, is that I have always been very frugal with how I spend my money. I do not get myself in debt. And so with that mindset, when I started Animal Education and Rescue, I never spent a lot of money on things like advertising. And when we took in animals, I was very, very cautious and careful how I spent money at the animal hospitals, because that could totally put you under. And I didn't have any paid employees. And from 2003 until 2008, I volunteered my time full time. So I did not receive any salary or any compensation whatsoever. So that kind of gives you an idea of that. And financially, we really struggled because obviously I was devoting a lot of time to Animal Education and Rescue. And because I was doing that, I was not as involved in promoting and marketing Pet Sitters of America, and that industry was changing on top of it, and so business was slowing down with that company. So it was definitely a stressful time. I did do other things to try to pull in income. I have a company called Compassionate Dog Training, so I did dog training. I kind of spun a lot of plates. So I taught dog training classes, and I also did individual one-on-one dog training at that time. I still do that. And what else? And I also do freelance writing. So I was making a little bit of money on my writing. Like I had a writing support group that I was hired for by a local library. So I got a little bit of money from running the writers group. I did some freelance writing where I got paid for some of my writing. So again, spinning a lot of plates to just try to make ends meet. And we also were very frugal. We didn't take vacations. We got clothes at thrift shops. We at that time did not do anything to fix up the house. The house continued to fall apart more and more. And so it was challenging, to say the least. So I wanted to see if anybody had any questions about anything I've said so far. I wanted to see if anybody has any questions before I continue on. I just wanted to make sure to give you some background. And also I want to mention too that in 2008, I wrote a book. It's called The Animal Warrior. If you haven't read it, I would highly recommend that you read it, because that will tell you firsthand all about the first 5 years of running Animal Education and Rescue. And the question that I'm being asked makes absolutely no sense to what we are talking about. And so I would suggest, Matthias, that you leave this live unless you're going to ask appropriate questions. That's what I would suggest to you, okay? Okay. Okay, so sorry everybody. I guess that was the first time that's ever happened, where somebody got on live and said a very inappropriate question, and so I actually blocked him because I'm not going to tolerate that. Okay, so Caroline says, was it difficult to get your family on board with running a humane society? Good question, Caroline. Yes. If you read my book, The Animal Warrior, it alludes to that a little bit. I was somewhat vague in my book, but I will tell you that from 2003 until, let me think, till 2015 or 14, I did everything myself. And I did not get the support of my family at all. As a matter of fact, they made it very difficult. My husband made it very, very difficult for me to run Animal Education and Rescue, he was not helpful at all. He actually was in the way a lot, complaining a lot, and it was very, very difficult. I look back on it and I wonder how the heck I did it, because I did do it all by myself. Obviously, I had help from volunteers, but volunteers come and go, and my husband was not in a good place in his life, and he was not supportive at all, and did the bare minimum that he needed to do to help, and caused me a lot of grief. And that's in all honesty, and he wouldn't mind that I said that because he's a different person now. And as far as my kids go, they were not supportive either, and it was primarily because they were teenagers, and teenagers, it's all about me and me, and they didn't like the fact that the animals were coming and going from the house. They didn't like the dogs barking. They didn't like the puking on the beds. They didn't like the, all that goes with actually taking in homeless animals. They didn't like it. They did not help me. They did not support me, and they caused me grief as well. So it was very, very difficult. My kids never really got on board, and they ended up growing up, they didn't help at all. They ended up growing up and moving out, having had this experience of me running this organization, but they were not involved and didn't want to be and didn't like it. And then in 2014, Chuck completely changed his life, my husband, and he's a different person. And so from 2014 until 2018, he has been 100% on board. Okay, so Kathy wants to know, how do you set limits for the number of animals taken in the beginning? That's a very good question. Well, I think one of the things, and I look back on everything I did, and everything I did was probably wrong, because I would sometimes take in 6 or 7 animals at a time or more, and then scramble for foster homes. To some extent, you're going to be doing that. Unfortunately, foster homes come and go. You're not going to get consistency with foster homes. You can also have a foster home that takes in an animal, and then they, for whatever reason, like in a day, a week, a month, 2 months, 5 months, change their mind and don't want to foster that animal anymore. And then you're going, oh my God, where do I bring that animal? Where is that animal going to go? So I would just say, I guess my advice in the beginning would be, know what volunteers you currently have that can foster. Make sure the people that are fostering have had proper training. Make sure that you've done your homework and seeing what's involved in fostering, making sure that you've lined up your animal hospitals that will give you a discount on their services. And so, like, if you don't have a shelter, which that's what we're going to mainly talk about, is if you don't have a shelter, think about how many animals you can personally take in, okay? And then if you think about how many foster homes you have, in the beginning, you're just not going to have a lot of foster homes. So let's say you have one foster home and it's you. And you have to just say to yourself, how many animals am I willing to take in? If you are willing to take in 2 animals, 2 dogs, let's say, you're willing to take in, then don't take any more than 3 animals or 3 dogs, because I will tell you that foster home could bail on you. They could bail on you at any time, and you always want to be kind of spinning your wheels or your web of finding new foster homes. Because they do come and go, they are volunteers, they are going to change their mind, they're not going to be always reliable. And so you have to say to yourself, what am I able to take in? Now, that all said, some organizations work with animal hospitals or boarding facilities and actually board animals at boarding facilities. We did that for a little while, but I will tell you right now that if you do that, then you're paying for boarding. And say to yourself, where am I getting this money? And like I said, with me, I was always frugal. I did not get us in debt. I never not paid my bills at the animal hospitals. I always paid my bills every month. and I didn't get myself into debt. And I certainly didn't use my own money for the organization because I didn't have any extra money to use. So I had money in the back of my mind always, as making sure that I didn't spend too much. And then always, because money was an issue, I didn't use animal hospitals to board animals or boarding facilities very much because it would cost money. I hope that answered your question. Corey says, do the local authorities have limits on the number of animals you are allowed? Good question, and yes, they do. And I will tell you right now, there is not one single rescue organization anywhere, I can guarantee you this, in the United States of America. I can't speak for Australia, but I guarantee you there is not a single one that does not have animals over the legal limit. It is impossible to run a rescue organization without having more animals than the legal limit, unless you're in a county or an area where you can have 10 animals or whatever. You're always going to be over the amount, and it's just something that we don't talk about. It's something that we're quiet about and that we're very careful about, and that we just make sure that we act responsibly, like the animals aren't running the neighborhood, they're not barking their heads off outside, and we don't talk. And when I say we, I mean any rescue organization, animal rescue, and we don't openly talk about or post pictures or talk about the number of animals that anyone has in their organization. So it's a complete misconception or unrealistic for anyone that starts an animal rescue organization to think that they're going to be able to stay within the legal limits of animals at all times. It's not going to happen. It's just not. And what you really hope for is that the authorities, the police or whatever else, is that they have bigger fish to fry than to worry about somebody that might have one or two too many dogs or cats or whatever in their house. As long as people aren't complaining, as long as neighbors aren't seeing animals running loose, or they aren't barking, the dogs aren't barking in the middle of the night every night, or the people are acting irresponsibly. That's the key, is that the animal rescue organization, if they're running it from their home or they have foster homes or whatever, is that they act responsibly and they're good citizens, and then hopefully the authorities will just not pay attention, because it should not be a priority in their lives. So I can tell you, not only will the founders or directors of any of these rescue organizations have too many animals, but so will almost every single foster home in the United States is probably over their legal limit, or at least a large majority of them. And again, it's acting responsibly. And that's a whole other topic that someday maybe we could talk about, but on the difference between someone that runs a responsible animal rescue organization where foster homes have animals and maybe they're over the legal limit, and hoarders. Hoarders are completely different. Hoarders, there's a whole list of qualities of hoarders, and I can guarantee you that because somebody runs a rescue organization and maybe they have too many animals, too many meaning legally animals in their home, does not make them a hoarder. Hoarders typically have mental illness and they're not willing to give animals up, and they just hoard them. They could be hoarders of newspapers, they could be hoarders of stuff, they could be hoarders of whatever. And in the case of animal hoarding, it's people that typically have depression, anxiety, OCD, and don't give these animals up because they feel this like crazy kind of intense love for the animal that's not realistic, and they get in over their heads with dozens of animals. So that's the difference there. And unfortunately, when they create these laws or these ordinances that say how many animals people can have, and then they put these laws in effect with rescue groups that only allow whatever the ordinance is in the town, it just doesn't add up. It's just not realistic, and there should really be a change in the laws to accommodate organizations that run rescue and that do it responsibly. So I hope that answers that question, Corey. And it was a great one. Hi, Sean. Okay. Any other questions at this point? Okay, I'm going to keep moving on. I want to share some of the highlights of running animal education and rescue, and some of the things that that really bring back memories. So, first of all, I will say that that I'm going to break it down into different things. I'm going to first talk about some of the animals that we bring in, and then we're going to talk about volunteers and so forth, and people we meet and so forth. So many of us get into this business of running an animal rescue organization, and I'm going to say animal rescue organization because that's more likely what most people are going to run, just making sure you understand that our organization is a humane society. So our job is a much broader one where education and the prevention of animal cruelty is a big part of our mission through our educational programs, blah, blah, blah. So, but we're just going to touch on the animal rescue part of it tonight. So with the animals that we take in, there's things that I did not even realize when I first started the organization. I think it's really important to understand. So there's different ways you can take in homeless animals. One way is you can take them from strays from the street. Okay, so these are animals that are just found on the street. Somebody calls you and says they found a stray and they can't keep it, and can you take it in? Then you can get animals that people surrender, people give up for whatever reason. So that would be another way to get animals. And then another way would be to get animals through either animal control facilities or high kill intake shelters, okay? So those are the different ways you can take animals in, and rescue organizations need to decide what is their mission as far as where are they willing to take animals from. If an organization doesn't have boundaries and they'll take animals from any of those sources, they're going to have to really be careful not to get overwhelmed with people contacting them asking to take animals. You also have to decide, if you're going to rescue from shelters and animal control facilities. By the way, animal control facilities are usually run by the government, by taxes by the government, and then shelters are typically nonprofit organizations that are privately run, but they can also be run by the government. So typically those kind of organizations, either of those, they get animals from owner surrender or from the streets or whatever. And if they're not a no-kill organization, they reach out to rescues that are no-kill to take these animals and to place them into foster homes. Now, there's some things to keep in mind is that, like when I started my organization, from 2003 until 2008, we learned about rescuing animals from outside of our area, and we learned about long distance transports. That's what they're called. And it's basically where rural areas where animals are, it's poor areas and they have dilapidated shelters, and there's a high euthanasia rate because they don't have anywhere for these animals to go. People are not spaying and neutering these animals. And I heard about these places, and they were reaching out to rescue organizations to actually take their animals and bring them to their communities to spay and neuter them and adopt them out. And I thought, oh, doesn't that sound wonderful? And isn't that great that we could help that way? And we're in more of a wealthier area and people adopt animals from our area, and I'm going to do that. And so we started going to Southern Illinois, which is about 8 hours away, and we went to Missouri and Indiana, and we would do these long distance transports where people from that end, let's say Southern Illinois, 8 hours away, is they had volunteers that were willing to drive, let's say 2 or 3 hours, our direction, and then they hand the animals off to another driver who's willing to drive another 2 or 3 hours, who hands that dogs off to another driver who then drives the rest of the way. And that's called, long distance transports and taking legs of the journey. And I thought, oh, that sounds so, in my subconscious, I thought, that sounds so romantic. And it does. And it sounds like you're really rescuing these animals. And it was an exciting time for us, in all honesty. And I remember the first time I went, actually drove myself because I wanted to see the shelter that we were working with, Crawford County Animal Shelter in Crawford County, Illinois. I wanted to see it myself, so I drove with a friend the 8 hours to the shelter. And by the way, I should say, before that, I had a phobia of driving outside my area. And because I had this mission to save animals, I drove the 8 hours there and back. I was the driver, and I was able to do it, and I didn't have anxiety attacks, and it actually cured me of my phobia. So I am very grateful for that experience. And doing some of these long distance transports really helped me kind of get on the horse, for a figure of speech, and really helped me. But there were a lot of challenges in taking animals from these shelters where they, were in such dire straits. We took in a lot of dogs that had parvo, which is an intestinal flu, and if it's not treated, the animals can die. One of the first set of puppies we took, one of the puppies died from parvo. His name was Harry, and Pippin, who was his litter mate, she survived, but it was only because of the tremendous hard work from the foster mom who actually cared for her, and she actually ended up adopting her. That was a huge experience right there, and it was very emotional. I think I write about it in my book, The Animal Warrior. And a lot of these animals end up with like Lyme's disease, or they have terrible fleas and ticks. They have intestinal parasites. They have heartworm, just all sorts of problems because they weren't well cared for. So we took animals from all those different areas. And then probably from 2003 till 2006, I was taking in an average of, my organization, 25 dogs a month, and finding foster homes or taking them in myself. And sometimes I would take in, at that time, 4 or 5 dogs at a time myself. And of course, you have to get them to the vet. You have to get them well if they're not healthy. You have to deal with their behavior issues. You have to promote them on your website. You have to post them. You have to bring them to adoption events. I can go on and on. I started getting emails from all over the Midwest of these groups that were begging for rescue groups like us to take animals from their rural shelters. And there was a lot of begging and saying things like the animals are going to die, they're they only have till Friday, and then if they don't get adopted or they don't get pulled, they're going to get killed. And then they would send you all these pictures of these terribly sad looking animals looking in the camera, and it would just kill you. And by 2008, because I was doing so much like taking animals from outside the area, I was completely stressed out and burnt out. Completely. I was having a lot of personal problems in my life too, between my husband and my daughter was very, very sick. She suffered with mental illness, and she was a teenager, and we were trying to get that diagnosed. It was just a terrible time in my life, and I was not getting any support from anybody, and I almost lost it just from the stress. And so that's when a couple things changed. As far as the animals are concerned, in 2008, I made the decision that we were going to no longer do long distance transports, and we were only going to rescue animals here in Lake County. I contacted all of those email lists that were sending me these pleas for animals all over the country. I wrote them nice emails telling them how much I appreciate all the work they're doing to help homeless animals, but that they need to take me off their list. And so by narrowing the area that we actually serviced, it allowed me to be able to rescue animals, but not lose my mind because I had to turn so many animals down. You know, when we went to, the different shelters to pick out the animals in these rural shelters, to pick out the animals that we were going to take, understand that we walked by cages and cages of animals that we did not take. And I had to live with that. I had to live with the fact that I didn't take that animal. So you have to understand too, is that if we don't create boundaries when we're in the world of rescue, then we can turn into a hoarder. Because then we start taking animals that we don't have space for, we don't have room for, and our whole lives become unmanageable. And the animals don't get the care that they deserve and so forth. So for me, because I was a very practical person and I did not get us into any kind of serious debt or anything like that, I refused to do that, and I knew my limitations. How I ended up dealing with it is that I no longer rescued from outside of our area. And by narrowing the area that we serviced, it allowed me the ability to be able to really concentrate on the animals in our community. And so we take animals now that are from either owner-surrendered animals or strays or from local animal control facilities. And it's been much, much more manageable, and I can handle that. And so I think that's really important for anyone that wants to get involved in rescue, is they have to have boundaries. What are they willing to take? Some organizations will only take animals from animal control facilities. They won't take owner surrenders, or some organizations will only take owner surrenders, and they won't take from either the streets or from animal control. So if you start an organization, set your boundaries and keep those boundaries, because if you don't, then I guarantee you, if you have a heart of gold like you would, because you wouldn't get into this business if you didn't, and you're constantly having to turn down animals, it's going to eat you alive, and you're going to burn out, and you're going to end up out of business. So that's a little bit about that. Does anybody have any questions on anything I just talked about now? And then I can get into some of the other challenges as far as volunteers go and running the organization. Okay, I see Mary joined, and I see Lori did. It's great to have you. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions, and I know sometimes, by the way, there's a lag time from the time that I see your questions or your comments, and when you post it. I also noticed that sometimes somebody will ask something and I don't even see it, so I don't know why it doesn't show up. So if you ask something and I don't answer it, feel free to post it again. It might mean I just didn't see it. So I'm going to keep moving on if nobody has any questions at this point. So let's talk about volunteers a little bit. I had a little bit of, I would say, understanding of what to expect and not to expect from volunteers, because I did run some nonprofit organizations prior to this. And when I started Animal Education and Rescue, actually right before, and when I was thinking about the pros and cons of running a nonprofit organization, one of the things that I put down as a possible challenge or a con was volunteers. That they can be very difficult, demanding, and unreliable. Was what my viewpoint at that time was. And to some extent that can be true. But I have learned so much about volunteers and about myself when it comes to running a nonprofit organization. And I want to talk to you about that tonight. And so hopefully I can help you with your life and whatever you're doing, whether it's nonprofit or it's not. I think attitude is a lot. to do with it and how you live your life, and if you're a manager or you own your own company, and how you manage or the people that are either working for you or volunteering for you. First, I want to mention that at this time, I have 2 very part-time paid employees, and the rest of the people in the organization are volunteers. We have over 200 people that are listed on our volunteer database, and of those 200 volunteers that are listed on our database, we probably have about 25% of those that volunteer regularly. The rest of them either very, very occasionally, and some of them not at all. And so when I started Animal Education and Rescue, I was a different person. Now, it's 15 years ago. My life was very different at that time. I was a very different person. I was a very trusting, open, loving person. I would say now I would call myself a loving person. I would say I'm also open to an extent, but I would definitely say I'm not, you have to earn my trust. And so, like, to give you an idea what I'm talking about, when I first started, I would let people come over to my house and volunteer. And I didn't get any background about them. I didn't interview them. There was no training, no involvement. I said, come on over. And there were even times when I wasn't here, and I actually I said to someone, they wanted to volunteer. I say, okay, come over. The door is unlocked, and here's what you can do. I mean, that's how open I was, and quite frankly, naive. I also had always had, up until 2008, maybe even a little before that, I really looked at everybody as being beautiful and wonderful and meaning the best, and that nobody would ever hurt somebody else intentionally. It was a very naive Pollyanna type of attitude, I think. And I had to really learn a couple hard lessons in order to realize that that's not realistic. And the first one, there were 2, early on, I had a first set of volunteers that started volunteering for me. And what happens is, oftentimes, especially early on, the volunteers became very close with each other. And sometimes it would be a husband and wife, or it would be an entire family. And so I would embrace these people because this was my loving nature, and because I would say naive and open and thinking everybody was great, that I just literally embraced them into my home, into my business, into my heart, and really created what I thought was this family environment. And that's not realistic, and without setting boundaries or setting expectations, I was in for some hard falls. The first time was a quieter fall when my core group of volunteers just up and left and started their own rescue organization. And at the time, I really didn't understand why. They didn't explain what, they just left. And these were people that I invited into my home, that I had intimate conversations with, and I thought were my friends. And they just basically drifted away and started their own organization, and that organization is still in business today. They actually mimicked a lot of the practices that I had in my organization to start their own. In one sense, I've learned that that's a real compliment, and that obviously they liked what I was doing because they are mimicking what I'm doing in their own organization, but it still was very hurtful because I thought they were my friends, and they weren't, clearly. The next group of volunteers, it was a worse situation. And with those group of volunteers, again, I told you I was naive and I was loving, and to the point where these people knew a lot of intimate details about my life, and I knew about their lives, and I considered them very close friends, and we spent a lot of time together. They started to talk about me behind my back, and they started accusing me, well, not to me at first, but amongst each other, that I was stealing things. I mean, which was a complete joke. I hope I don't have to defend myself to you. I mean, that I bought a camera that I shouldn't have bought, and that I was really using it for personal use. I mean, just really like a lynch mob against me, where this entire group, somehow they cooked up with each other, and then they actually met with me and two of the head honchos. And basically, this was in 2008, when things in my life were very, very difficult. My daughter was very sick. My marriage was falling apart. And they knew that. And that was right around the time where I couldn't handle taking animals from all over the Midwest, and where I was starting to reel it in. I had decided to take in animals only from Lake County. And these volunteers didn't like that, because they liked the idea of taking animals from all over. But of course, they didn't shoulder that responsibility. I did. And they just behind my back started saying really awful things about me. They actually confronted me, and I was so taken aback and so dumbfounded, and my heart was broken into a million pieces, because I was so, I was just shocked. They were my friends. And I almost closed the organization at that time. That was end of 2008. All my volunteers left me, and they started their own organization. My youth club disbanded at that point, because all of my youth club kids were the kids of those volunteers. And I really contemplated closing. I had nobody to help me. I had no support emotionally. And somehow I just decided to pick myself up and figure out how I can do it differently. And that's when I really had to think hard. Okay, Sandy, twice this has happened to you. This kind of open-hearted, and I'm not saying we shouldn't be open-hearted. I totally believe we should be open-hearted. But this naive, open-hearted, trusting everybody is not working for you. And so it was a great lesson for me in life, in learning to be a little bit more guarded, not to allow just anybody to volunteer. At that point, at the beginning of 2009, I started requiring volunteers to attend a new volunteer orientation, and I created a manual that explained everything that we did and why we did it. I tried to touch on things that could be controversial, because I didn't want any problems with how we ran things. For instance, what does no-kill mean? What does declawing mean? All these things that can be hot topics in the animal rescue world. The other thing, too, is I didn't want to lose my ability and my natural instinct to love people. In the animal world, whether it's animal rescue, whether it's dog grooming, whether it's pet sitting, it's dog training, whatever it is, animal people have a tendency to be less people-oriented. And the big joke is they always say things like, we want to be around animals because we don't like people, or we like animals more than people. And I knew that. So when I created this manual, and when I really thought about what our mission was, our mission was to bring people and animals together. So I had to think about how I was going to really find people that were people-oriented and animal-oriented. And so I didn't want the people that were disgruntled with human beings. Those were clearly the volunteers I had in the past were like that. I wanted people that wanted to embrace human beings and also wanted to embrace animals. And so when I wrote that manual, I incorporated all of my personal philosophy on people and animals. And so I was basically soliciting people like myself. And since that time, I started the orientations, and I'm just very honest about who I am and the kind of volunteers I'm looking for. And I bluntly tell people, if you are not people oriented, if you would rather be with animals than people, we are not the right organization for you. And I tell them that we love people and animals, that we're respectful, we don't swear, we are professional, that we want to make this a better planet for everyone. And so what ends up happening now is those people that would maybe backstab me in the past, they're not going to volunteer for me, those kind of people. It's people that are progressive, people that are open-hearted for both people and animals, people that are kind and compassionate are the ones that are going to be attracted to our organization. So since I started the new volunteer orientations, I have found more people like myself. And I have not had anybody do some of those horrible things that happened early on in the organization. So it was a great lesson for me. Thank you, Caroline, for letting me know it's nearly 8 o'clock. I'm happy to go longer. I know there's a lot to talk about. So at this point, I want to see if anybody has any questions for anything that I just talked about right now. And as I wait to see if there's any questions, I just want to reiterate that you need to decide what the mission of your organization is, and then stick to it. And know who you are and what you're able to handle and what you're not, and what is important to you and what's not. But I can just caution you that sometimes animal people have a hard time with human beings, and you've got to be really careful when you have people like that in your life. If you're like that and you want people like that, that's great. But if you're not, then maybe do it like I did it if you're going to run an organization. Okay, I want to touch on some of the things that I did not realize when I started the organization. And I would say that besides the volunteers and what happened with them, one of the things that I didn't even think about, because I was very kind of romanticizing it, was rescuing animals. And while we did make sure that the animals that we rescued weren't vicious, most of the time, there were times where we took in animals that actually bit or that were aggressive. And that was a huge problem from early on. Hold on one second, I'll get back to that. Let me answer Kathy's question. Do you do any background checks on volunteers? It depends on what they're going to do. So I don't do a professional background check on the volunteers, because the volunteers, I only let a few select people come to what we call the orphanage, which has been dubbed, my house has become dubbed the orphanage. I only let a very few select people come here. Again, I've learned my lesson. And those people are people that have earned the right to. Those are people that I've gotten to know very well and that have volunteered for a long time. As far as like foster families, I check references. So I check personal references and talk to them over the phone. I have been interviewing people since 1987 for hiring them for my other company. So I have a pretty good ability to be able to read through people. And as far as professional background checks, no, we have not done that. Now with the internet, like if people go to adopt an animal from us, we do a background check online. Hey, don't scratch me. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question, Kathy. And okay, so where was I? All right, let me think for a second. Okay, so one thing I did not take into consideration, what happens if the animal turns out to be unpredictably aggressive? What does that mean? Unpredictably aggressive means that they bite for no reason. Like they don't guard their food. It's not necessarily that. They don't bite if they see a stranger. Some things that might be obvious, but like for no reason they'll bite in different situations and you can't figure it out. And what do you do about it? Can you adopt out an animal like that? Probably not. I can tell you from my personal experience, you can't. those kind of animals, it's irresponsible for any organization to adopt out an animal that unpredictably bites. And so that would be one scenario. Let's say you take an animal that is incontinent. You didn't know that when you got the animal. And who's going to want to adopt an animal that is in diapers? Practically nobody. What about the animal that you feel that, like you couldn't say no because you knew it was going to be euthanized the next day, and it's this sweet old 12-year-old dog that just melts your heart, and you think it's going to have a year or two left. Who's going to adopt that animal? Okay, so those were things that I didn't really consider. I didn't even think about. Who would think about that? I always thought just the animals, you take them in, you fix them up, you get them adopted. But there are a group of animals that are going to be hard or nearly impossible to adopt out. Thus, how my home got dubbed the orphanage. Because there were a number of animals throughout the 15 years I've been doing this that never got adopted. And those were animals that ended up staying at the orphanage for their entire lives. There was a dog named Magoo that we took in that was blind and deaf and had separation anxiety, and I carried him around in a pouch for 2.5 years. And he lived with me until he passed away. Stop. Stop. Don't scratch me. No. Got a cat scratching me. And I have a dog right now. Her name is Mona. She is a purebred Alaskan Husky, and she is incontinent, sort of. She used to be worse, but she still is a little bit, and she has seizures. So she's been very hard to adopt out. We've also taken in probably a dozen animals in the last 15 years, maybe less, maybe a little less than a dozen, that were unpredictably aggressive. And I write about it in my book, The Animal Warrior, and I will tell you, and up front, we are a no-kill organization, but no-kill does not mean you never kill, and you have to understand that. The definition of no-kill is that you will not euthanize due to space. And we have never euthanized due to space, meaning we had nowhere for the animal to go. Believe me, we've gotten creative. But we have euthanized for aggression. And I will tell you right now, harder for me than anything else ever that I have done. And if I had known about this before I started Animal Education and Rescue, I probably wouldn't have done it. I probably would not have started it. So I guess in a way, it's probably good I didn't know. But the dozen times or less, probably, I don't know, if I thought about it, I could probably count them. Maybe 8 times, 9 times, whatever, that we've had to euthanize a dog. I never forgot it. And it literally tore me to pieces and brought major anxiety to me where I could barely breathe, and I spent weeks not being able to cope with the pain of having to make that decision, but knowing that I was backed in a corner and I didn't have anything else to do. Nobody's going to take a Rottweiler mix that bites people, bites dogs, bites cats, has fear aggression, has territorial aggression. I mean, that's just one of the dogs. And actually, I write about her, Chrissy, in my book, The Animal Warrior. These aggressive animals, unfortunately, it's not, and even if somebody, a kind-hearted person said, I'll take the animal. I know you've worked with the animal for 6 months, and I know you said that nothing can be done, but I'll just deal with it. And it's putting unnecessary stress and so forth on that individual. It's not fair to that person, even if they don't realize what they're getting themselves into. It's a huge liability risk. If that animal, if that dog or whatever bites somebody and that person has to be hospitalized, the owner of that dog could literally lose everything. It's not fair to do. There's so many really amazing, wonderful dogs that are sitting in shelters or rescue groups that need homes. Why would we take that risk with a dog like that? Now, I am saying all this in all honesty and all like transparency. There are other nonprofit no-kill rescue or shelters that would disagree with me, and they are what I call radical no-kill. They are the ones that will not euthanize no matter what. So what they'll do with these vicious animals is they'll just figure it out. They'll have them stay, I don't know, in a kennel and only have certain people handle them for their whole lives, or they'll send them somewhere. I don't know what they do with them. I honestly don't know. But I just, for what we're able to do and willing to do, that's what my comfort level is. I certainly cannot have animals that are aggressive and unpredictably biting at my house. I'm not willing to take that risk, either for myself or my family or people that come to my home. So that was, I would say, the number one hardest thing that I've had to deal with, that emotionally was trying for me. Okay, so Caroline wants to know, do you need to carry special insurance for liability? Yes, we have liability insurance that we get through a regular insurance company that is written for rescue organizations, and as long as you don't have a claim, it's I think $1,500 a year or something we pay, maybe $2,000 a year. The sad thing is I know other nonprofit rescue organizations where they've had to make a claim and then the insurance company drops them. And if they can't find insurance elsewhere, they're out of business. So it's really a racket, unfortunately, with the animal rescue. So even though you have insurance, like we have been so, well, Caroline, you should know, I'm like super diligent at adoption events and with foster families. I'm so careful, and I try to have all my ducks in a row, and we don't bring animals that have any issues at all to adoption events, and we try to really keep in regular contact with the foster families and tell them the rules and make sure they stick to them. Like we don't have them take animals to dog parks, the dogs to dog parks, and I mean there's just so many rules we have, and that's to hopefully avoid having anything happen that would cause us to have to file a claim and then potentially lose our insurance. So yes, we do have insurance, but it's a precarious situation, and you definitely don't want to use the insurance if you don't have to. That was a good question. Okay. Any other questions? I'm starting to fade out, guys. This cold has been difficult. So let's see what else I can stress to you or tell you about. I can tell you that in my life that there's been different points in my life where I've had different hard challenges, both personally and professionally. Every small business I started, there were challenges in running it. And I would say with animal education and rescue, what happened, and I think what happens to a lot of us in the animal rescue world, is it becomes your life. It kind of, in a sense, consumes you. You never get away from it. I mean, I get text messages and calls from foster families up till midnight and 6 a.m. and 7 days a week. And there are emergencies that happen. The animals that I personally have in my own care, it's a tremendous amount of work. And it's hard. And when animals get sick and when they die, it's devastating. Juggling and working with a lot of different volunteers with a lot of different personalities and with their own issues that they're dealing with is challenging, is hard. Fortunately, since 2008, and when I set those boundaries and those rules that I learned from, I have an amazing group of volunteers that I also consider my friends. And a lot of them I hang out with outside of animal education and rescue, and I love them dearly. and they're great people. So that's a plus, but it's all quite consuming. It's something you never get away from. You don't leave your job when you run an animal rescue organization. So Caroline wants to know, what happens to the organization when you want to retire? I don't know. That's a long time away, Caroline. I have no intention of retiring. I'm way young for retiring. And besides, I don't retire. Am I kidding? So I will do this until I can't do it anymore, or until I don't want to do it anymore. But it's certainly not going to be on a time frame of retiring, because I've never been in a career where retirement has ever been discussed, because in my line of works, meaning being a small business owner, you don't retire when you're a small business owner unless you made a lot of money. I'll always be working, and I'll always be doing things. And, for as long as I feel passionate about it, and I meet wonderful people, and I have more positive experiences and more beautiful experiences and more uplifting experiences, I will continue doing what I'm doing. My guess is 30 years from now, 40 years from now, when I can no longer run animal education and rescue, unless somebody has been involved for a while and can take over, it would probably close. Because animal education and rescue, the way that it's kind of been, I guess the way it runs is it's basically, people know it as Sandy Kamen Wisniewski. So if I'm no longer part of it, I think it would be very difficult for it to run. It's just, I'm too involved. So, but it's nothing to worry about, Caroline, because I plan on doing it until forever. Or again, unless it becomes too much of a hardship and too many negatives. But I'm not going to let that happen. And I'm always going to try to manage it in a way, now that I've learned some of these lessons, I'm going to try to manage it in a way that allows me to set my limits and be able to still enjoy what I'm doing and really know I'm making a difference in the world. I hope that answers your question. Any other questions? Okay, well, I think we've been on a long time, and I'm sure you all have other things you need to do at this point. I certainly am more than happy to answer any other questions anyone has. Otherwise, and I also could talk about this all night long, and because there's so much to cover and so much to talk about. I'll just remind you of a couple things. Consider picking up The Animal Warrior, the book, if you haven't read it, because it does really express the first 5 years of running the organization, and it's a real eye-opener, and it's a lot of really great stories, and it's educational, and it's inspiring, and it'll give you kind of like an inside view of the first 5 years. And I'm happy to do another live regarding this, or answer any other questions that people have personally. But all I can tell you is that if you're considering running a nonprofit rescue organization, do know that this is something you cannot do part-time. It's something that will require money to make it happen, and so you'll have to figure out, are you able to volunteer your time full-time, and full-time means 50, 60 hours a week. Are you able to do that? Or do you have a nest egg or money set aside that you can start an organization like that? And also understanding that you're going to be working with a lot of volunteers, and you cannot count on volunteers long-term. And frankly, you always have to consider the fact that a volunteer can quit or not show up or whatever anytime. So in all essence, you really have to rely very heavily on yourself to be able to get all of these things done that you need to do with the organization. And also understand that not all animals are sweet and lovable and perfect. that a lot of them will come pretty wrecked, emotional baggage, medical conditions, and some of them so wrecked that they can't be saved. So I guess that sums up everything. And I will end by telling you that I wouldn't change a thing. That everything that I learned from running this organization has made me a better person. That it has been incredibly difficult, but incredibly rewarding. And that's how life works, is that in order to grow and to become a wiser person, we must experience hardship. And I certainly have experienced a lot of hardship in my life, both personally and professionally. And now I hope that I'm at a stage in my life where I'm wiser and I can share that wisdom with the world and help the world be a better place for everybody. And I hope to continue to run Animal Education and Rescue for, dozens of years in the future. And I so look forward to helping more animals and for helping people as well. So people and animals, and getting to know and spend more time with all the loving, wonderful, amazing volunteers that I have that are part of my life and part of my family. So I guess with that, since I don't see any other questions, I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for joining me, and we'll see you next time, okay? Bye, everyone.